Hi, it's Erica Koenig-Workman here to read you another installment from Under the Sea Wind by Rachel Carson. Thank you so much for listening tonight, and this is going to be about a 20-minute reading. I so enjoy reading Rachel Carson and her stories about seabirds and wildlife and wild birds. Just because it reminds me so much of Steveston, where I live, and experience a lot of what she writes about. Sometimes out there, just going for walks and watching the birds and experiencing all the wonderful just wildlife that's here. So I want to just share with you a reading from Chapter 2, Spring Flight. This is part 3, and hope you enjoy it. And I want to wish you a very happy New Year and Merry Christmas Day still. And thank you again for joining me here. Okay. The night when the great run of shad was passing through the inlet and into the river estuary was a night, too, of vast movements of birds into the second country. At daybreak and the half-tide, 2 small sanderlings ran beside the dark water on the ocean beach of the barrier island, keeping in the thin film at the edge of the ebbing surf. They were trim little birds in rust and grey plumage, and they ran with a twinkle of black feet over the hard-packed sand where puffs of blown spume or sea froth rolled like thistledown. They belonged to a flock of several hundred shorebirds that had arrived from the south during the night. The migrants had rested in the lee of the great dunes, while darkness remained, now growing light, and ebbing water was drawing them to the sea's edge. As the 2 sanderlings probed the wet sand for small, thin-shelled crustaceans, they forgot the long flight of the night before in the excitement of the hunt. For the moment they forgot, too, that faraway place which they must reach before many days had passed, a place of vast tundras, of snow-fed lakes, and of midnight sun. Blackfoot, leader of the migrant flock, was making his 4th journey from the southernmost tip of South America to the Arctic nesting grounds of his kind. In his short lifetime, he had traveled more than 60,000 miles, following the sun north and south across the globe, some 8,000 miles, spring and fall. The then little hen sanderling that ran beside him on the beach was a yearling, returning for the first time to the Arctic she had left as a fledgling 9 months before. Like the older sanderlings, Silver Bar had changed her winter plumage of pearly grey for a mantle heavily splashed with cinnamon and rust, the colours worn by all sanderlings on their return to their first home. In the fringe of the surf, Blackfoot and Silver Bar sought the sandbugs or hippocraps that honeycombed the ocean beach with their burrow wings. Of all the food of the tide zone, they loved best these small egg-shaped crabs. After the retreat of each wave, the wet sand bubbled with the air released from the shallow crab burrows, and a sanderling could, if he were quick and sure of foot, insert his bill and draw out the crab before the next wave came rumbling in. Many of the crabs were washed out by the swift rushes of the waves and left kicking in liquefying sand. Often the sanderlings seized these crabs in the moment of their confusion, before they could bury themselves by furious scrambling. Pressing close to the backwash, Silver Bar saw 2 shining air bubbles pushing away the sand grains, and she knew that a crab was beneath. Even as she had watched the bubbles, her bright eyes saw that a wave was taking form in the tumbling confusion of the surf. She gauged the speed of the mound of water as it ran, toppling up the beach. Above the deeper undertones of moving water, she heard the lighter hiss that came as the crest began to spill. Almost in the same instant, the feathered antennae of the crab appeared above the sand. Running under the very crest of the green water hill, Silverbar probed vigorously in the wet sand with opened bill and drew out the crab. Before the water could so much as wet her legs, she turned and fled up the beach. While the sun still came in level rays across the water, others of the sanderling flock joined Blackfoot and Silverbar, and the beach was soon dotted with small shore birds. A tern came flying along the surf line, his black-capped head bent and his eyes alert for the movement of fish in the water. He watched the sanderlings closely, for sometimes a small beach bird could be frightened into giving up its catch. When the tern saw Blackfoot run swiftly into the path of a wave and seize a crab, he slanted down menacingly, screaming threats in a shrill, grating voice. "Terra! Terra!" rattled the tern. The swoop of the white-winged bird, which was twice as large as the sanderling, took Blackfoot by surprise, for his senses had been occupied with eluding the onrush of water and preventing the escape of a large crab held in his bill. He sprang into the air with a sharp "Geet! Geet!" and circled out over the surf. The tern whirled after him in pursuit, crying loudly. In his ability to bank and pivot in the air, Blackfoot was fully the equal of the tern. The two birds, darting and twisting and turning, coming up sharply together and falling down away again into the wave troughs, passed out beyond the breakers, and the sound of their voices was lost to the sanderling flock on the beach. As he rose steeply into the air in a pursuit of Blackfoot, the tern caught sight of a glint of silver in the water below. He bent his head to mark the new prey more certainly and saw the green water spangled with silver streaks as the sun struck the flanks of a school of feeding silversides. Instantly the tern tipped his body steeply into a plane perpendicular to the water. He fell like a stone, although his body could not have weighed more than a few ounces, struck the water with a splash and a shower of a spray, and in a matter of seconds emerged with a fish curling in his bill. Now by this time Blackfoot, forgotten by the tern in the excitement engendered by the bright flashes in the water, had reached the shore and dropped down among the feeding sanderlings, where he was running and probing busily as before. After the tide turned, the water pressed stronger from the sea. The waves came in with a deeper swell and a heavier crash, warning the sanderlings that feeding on the ocean beach was no longer safe. The flock wheeled out over the sea with the flashing of the white wing bars that distinguished them from other sandpipers. They flew low over the crests of the waves as they traveled up the beach, so they came to the point of land called Ship's Shoal, where the sea had broken through the barrier island to the sound years before. Excuse me. Just need a glass of water. At the point, the inlet beach lay level as a floor from the sea on the south side to the sound on the north. The wind sand flat was a favorite resting place for sandpipers, plovers, and other shorebirds, and It was moved, too, by the terns, and it was loved by the terns, the skimmers, and the gulls, who make their living from the sea, but gather to rest on shores and sand spits. That morning the inlet beach was thronged with birds resting and waiting for the tide turn, that they might feed again, fueling small bodies for the northward journey. Now it was the month of May, and the great spring migration of shorebirds was at its height. Weeks before, the waterfowl had left the sounds. 2 spring tides and 2 neap tides had passed since the last skein of snow geese had drifted to the north, like wisps of cloud in the sky. The mergansers had gone in February, looking for the first breaking up of the ice in the northern lakes, and soon after them the canvasbacks had left the wild celery beds of the estuary and followed the retreating winter to the north. So too the brant eaters of the eelgrass that carpeted the shallows of the sound, the swift blue-winged teal, and the whistling swans filling the skies with their soft trumpetings. Then the bell notes of the plovers had begun to ring among the sandhills, and the liquid whistle of the curlew throbbed in the salt marshes. Shadowy forms moved through the night skies, and piping so soft as barely to be audible, drifted down to fishing villages sleeping below, as the birds of shore and marsh poured northward along ancestral lanes, seeking their nesting places. Now, while the shorebirds left and they slept on the inlet beach, the sands belonged to other hunters. After the last bird had settled to rest, a ghost crab came out of his burrow in the loose white sand above the high water mark. He sped along the beach, running swiftly on the tips of his 8 legs. He paused at a massive sea wrack left by the night tide, not a dozen paces from the spot where Silverbar stood on the edge of the sanderling flock. The crab was a creamy tan, matching the sand so closely that he was all but invisible when he stood still. Only his eyes, like 2 black shoe buttons on stacks, showed color. Silverbar saw the crab crouch behind the litter of sea oats, stubble, leaves of beach grass, and pieces of sea lettuce. He was waiting for a sand hopper or beach flea to show itself by an unwary movement. As the ghost crabs knew, the beach fleas hid in the seaweeds when the tide was out, browsing on them and picking up bits of decaying refuse. Before the tide had risen another hand's breadth. Okay, who knows the measurement of a hand's breadth? I haven't looked that up lately. Is that like 2 hands piled on top of each other? A hand's breadth. A beach flea crept out from under a green frond of sea lettuce and leaped with an agile flexing of its legs across a stem of sea oats as large to it as a fallen pine. Now the ghost crab sprang like a pouncing cat and seized the flea in his large crushing claw, or chela, and devoured it. During the next hour, he caught and ate many of the beach hoppers, stealing on silent feet from one vantage point to another as he stalked his prey. After an hour, the wind changed and blew in across the inlet channel, obliquely from the sea. Now one by one the birds shifted their position so that they faced the wind. Above the surf, at the point, they saw a flock of several hundred terns fishing. A shoal of small, silvery fish was passing seaward around the point, and the air was filled with the white wing flashes of diving terns. At intervals, the birds on the beach at Ship's Shoal heard the flight music of hurrying flocks of black-bellied plovers high in the sky, and twice they saw long lines of dewitchers passing northward. At noon, white wings sailed over the dunes, the sand dunes, and a snowy egret swung down onto long black legs. The bird alighted at the margin of a pond that lay half encircled by marsh, between the eastern end of the dunes and the inlet beach. Pause there for a second. Does this not sound like Gary Point Park to you? It does to me. Anyways, I'll continue on. Every day the small white heron came to fish the pond, seeking the killifish and other minnows that darted in its swallows and its shallows. Sometimes, too, he found the young at larger fishes, for the highest tides of each month cut through the beach on the ocean side and brought in fish from the sea. The pond slept in noonday quiet. Against the green of the marsh grass, the heron was a snow-white figure on slim black stilts, tense and motionless. Not a ripple, nor the shadow of a ripple, passed beneath his sharp eyes. Then 8 pale minnows swam single file above the muddy bottom, and 8 black shadows moved beneath them. With a snake-like contortion of its neck, the heron jabbed violently, but missed the leader of the solemn little parade of fish. The minnows scattered in sudden panic as the clear water was churned to muddy chaos by the feet of the heron, who darted one way and another, skipping and flapping his wings in excitement. In spite of his efforts, he captured only one of the minnows. The heron had been fishing for an hour, and the sanderlings, sandpipers, and plovers had been sleeping for 3 hours when a boat's bottom grated on the sound beach near the point. 2 men jumped out into the water and made ready to drag a haul seine through the shallows on the rising tide. The heron lifted his head and listened. Through the fringe of sea oats on the sound side of the pond, he saw a man walking down the beach toward the inlet. Alarmed, he thrust his feet hard against the mud, and with a flapping of wings took over the dunes toward the heron rookery in the cedar thickets a mile away. Some of the shorebirds ran twittering across the beach toward the sea. Already the terns were milling about overhead in a noisy cloud, like hundreds of scraps of paper flung to the wind. The sanderlings took flight and crossed the point, wheeling and turning almost as one bird, and passed down the ocean beach about a mile. The ghost crab, still at his hunting of beach fleece, was alarmed by the turmoil of birds overhead, by the many racing shadows that sped over the sand. By now he was far from his own burrow. When he saw the fishermen walking across the beach, he dashed into the surf, preferring this refuge to flight. But a large channel bass was lurking nearby, and in a twinkling the crab was seized and eaten. Later in the same day, the bass was attacked by sharks, and what was left of it was cast up by the tide onto the sand. There the beach fleas, scavengers of the shore, swarmed over it and devoured it. And that's the end of this part, which I call part 3, reading Rachel Carson's Under the Sea Wind. Only in chapter 2. So got a ways to go. So thank you so much for joining me. And wishing you a most blessed Happy New Year 2026. Good things for you lie ahead. Okay, bye for now.